Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Noel Casler podcast. Check this out 1968 Martin 0018C. For those of you who know, that's a nylon string classical guitar from the C.F. Martin Company. Built in Nazareth, PA, baby. New to the collection. Thank you, Santa Claus. I am enjoying this. If you wonder where I've been, this is it. Sorry. It's been a minute. Back with you here, episode 88 of the Noel Casler podcast. We got a lot to get into. It's been a busy about 11 days since I put one of these out. I'm on Twitter, as you all know, and I'm writing on Substack. So if it takes a minute to put out a pod, it's not that I'm not thinking about you guys or doing other things. I'm just trying to deal with it all, and I wait until I feel like I got something to say before I say anything. That's always been my rule of thumb. Otherwise, it just becomes a job, And we're beyond that, right? We're talking about like things that matter as a nation. That's what this podcast to me is just about me trying to figure out, make sense of this time we're in along with everybody else, and I say, a lot, sorry. I did Stephanie Miller's show this morning. I just finished taping that. So, been already talking for an hour, and we can kind of work backwards. The Elon Musk stuff is worth mentioning just because it's so dangerous. The fact that he tweeted out yesterday, my pronouns are prosecute Fauci. So at once he was, proselytizing anti-COVID disinformation that, has killed over 1 million Americans and is surging again as we speak. Everybody I know is getting it again. I call it the silent surge this time because nobody really seems interested in talking about it. But then he demonizes Dr. Fauci at the same time, making his life dangerous. A doctor who has to have security to protect himself and his family, which is insane. If you're the head of the NIH and you've in your career helped develop AZT and save millions of lives, you've helped develop a vaccine that literally allowed us to leave our homes and go back out in the world again, and you're going to attack a guy who did that. It's insane, right? But Elon Musk is a troll, so that's his brand. He knows it's going to spark a lot of outrage and circulate, and it's going to be more fodder for the idiots who follow him. And then he tried to show up at a Dave Chappelle. Not tried to show up. He was invited by Chappelle. Let's be real. And Chappelle gave him 10 minutes of stage time, basically during his set in San Francisco last night in some arena. But what happened was Elon just got booed the whole time, and they couldn't really say anything. Dave got in a couple jokes and, slams, and they had a laugh at the expense of people who had been fired at Twitter. Dave said, I think all those people booing are people you fired. Ha ha ha, so funny firing people, right before the holidays when they, went into a line of work that, they assumed they would have a steady income. They'll get hired again. But, my point is firing people is not a fun thing. Right? It shouldn't be something that anybody ever takes pleasure in, but it's that same snarky kind of, I fired you. It's no accident it was Trump's tagline on the show that was developed at NBC that I worked on, right? The Apprentice, the Celebrity Apprentice, right? You're fired. It was sort of the beginning of the snark bro culture when that began, right? Money, 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 right? This big, greedy and ruthless, right? Trying to get that Gordon Gekko greed is good, Wall Street, I'm a wolf kind of attitude back and celebrated in America, right? In American men. That same sort of toxic masculinity. You're fired is the equivalent of like, I'm armed, do not enter like on someone's property, right? Never mind the dog, beware of owner. That same sort of bro culture, toxic BS, the guys with the big pickup trucks and the beards and like, acting like they're going into Fallujah when they're walking into Walmart. So that sort of un, you know, unempathetic, unsensitive. I don't have to worry about the next guy. I can have a big laugh at somebody who just got fired, who might have kids and a mortgage and Christmas coming up. It's all good. It's all fodder for the grist mill. And that stuff feeds on itself, and that's become the sort of defining characteristic not only of the GOP but of sort of social media in America in general. Twitter is awful now. I get a lot of people like, just block them. It's easy to say that if you have 500 followers and 1,000 followers. You get into substantial multitudes of that number and it becomes impossible to block everybody. And you spend half your day angry and pissed off and trying to catch up. And at least before Elon took over, things that were obviously anti-Semitic, obviously homophobic, obviously, espousing violence, you could at least report those tweets and feel like you were doing your civic duty to kind of self-police and keep it a kind of a cleaner environment and not let that kind of hate, continue to circulate. Now you can't even report those people because none of them are in violation of the terms because there are no terms. Elon is clearly a Nazi, right? He's clearly a mediocre white guy who benefited from apartheid, didn't have any kind of moral enlightenment from what he witnessed as a kid, was like basically, yeah, that's cool, and then he moved to Canada and then he moved to Penn and then he started bullshitting about his credentials and sort of, fancied himself and designed himself to be a tech genius, when in reality he made his own fortune because of being part of Peter Thiel and PayPal and that sort of financial arm of the tech industry. But Elon, he took over Tesla. He bought it from two other guys who actually did the inventions and then, took on the allure and like, I'm the genius who's going to take us all to Mars, and then establishes SpaceX, which is full of engineers and researchers and ex-astronauts. Garrett Reisman is an astronaut. I know. I used to date his younger sister. And I used to live in Garrett's house, like with his parents and stuff. He's a whole family of geniuses. He was the U.S. astronaut who spent the most time on the space shuttle. Not the space shuttle, the space station. He served with Kelly, with the Kellys in Arizona and stuff, Mark Kelly. I've had a conversation with Mark about Garrett Reisman. But anyway, Garrett works for SpaceX. Garrett's a genius. Those are the kind of people that are doing the work behind the scenes and building and creating the technology that Elon sort of positioned himself to be the, complete creator of, right? And it worked because cyber bros saw that and they're like, bro, he's the richest man in the world. Like, he owns a car company and a rocket ship and he likes Dogecoin too, he's going to make me rich. So they get attracted to that. Like guys like Musk and Elon, narcissists, they need to be fed by adulation constantly. They need an army of people telling them they're great. That's why Trump only surrounded himself with sycophants in the White House, right? He wouldn't let anybody around him who was going to give him a negative answer because his ego was too fragile. A real leader seeks out the guys who aren't going to bullshit him, especially when they get in a position of power like the presidency. If you worked for Barack Obama, President Obama, it was a requirement that you had to be able to tell him the truth. If he got the sense that you were just cowed by the office, and trying to kick his ass, he wasn't going to call on you for an opinion, right? He wanted guys who were going to tell him, what he didn't want to hear, because that helps you make a more informed decision. You want to see things from all the other angles, and you want somebody to challenge your idea if you really care about the outcome, right? Because it's not about you, it's about serving the people. And millions of people's lives are going to be affected by any decision you make as president, right? Nothing is monotonous. Nothing is routine. Just a little thing like, where to put in a highway and transportation issues and stuff. They have domino effects that impact the lives of people you'll never meet, but you're in charge of their well-being temporarily. And to anybody with a brain or in a heart too, that's a real high honor. That's something you strive to live up to, and you make sure you have the best people around you to make sure you don't, do too much damage, because we're all human and we're all fallible and we all do have egos and points of view. And the trick in life, in my opinion, is to see things from somebody else's point of view. That's why I'm always, harping on the humanities and the arts. And it's not because I'm the most creative person in the world. It's because I know that if I hear somebody else's story, it's going to give me a more of a depth as a person. It's going to give me more of an understanding, because I'm somebody who, struggles against my own judgment, as many of us do. I'm super judgmental, and I'm a comedian, so I work in generalizations, right? It's not meant to. There's always an exception, like when I talk about rural white voters, there's always somebody who's like, hey, I voted for, Bernie Sanders and I live in, meth lab, Georgia or whatever. Like, I get it. I'm just talking about in general. I'm talking about on the graph when you see the county turn red. That's what I'm talking about. I know in pockets of those red states, there's tons of liberal people, and nobody's black and white. That's the interesting thing about the human condition. I went to drama school and I read a lot of plays. And what you'll find if you really take apart like the great characters in drama is that people are competing against themselves in many ways, right? It's a battle against your own forces, what your motivations are, what your responsibilities are, what the circumstances are, that's all occurring in, and how you react to that. And everybody's in conflict, right? Shakespeare talked about that kind of stuff. You read King Lear, you see almost the invention of the human personality and the illumination of it in these plays, if you really dig into them. And the only reason I had to, because it was the only academic work. I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, so a lot of it is performance. It's a conservatory, right? But that was like the schoolwork portion was reading a play every week and doing a play report. And I got good at diagnosing sort of what was motivating a character. It was the easiest way to break down a play. And you can apply that to these CEOs and these executives, like a president, right? You see, like, what's motivating this guy to wake up and attack, a scientist, a guy who spent his whole life trying to help people, a guy who's clearly smarter than me, right? Not just Noel, but smarter than Elon Musk, okay? Like, Elon Musk is not fit to shine Dr. Fauci's shoes, okay? Dr. Fauci went to Regis High School, got one of the best medical educations in this country and worked at NIH and rose to the top of his field. We all saw the mild-mannered, scientific, guy who had this equilibrium that he was able to stand there during press briefings where Trump was telling people to drink bleach, and all these insane things at the darkest moment in modern American history in many ways, right? 9/11 was gut-wrenchingly awful, but we were in a greater crisis when you look at numbers during the pandemic, especially early in the pandemic, March, April of 2020. Nobody knew what was going on, how long this was going to last, if it was ever going to open up again. We were trying to get some science. We were like a year away from a vaccine, basically, right? And Trump's telling people to drink bleach and that there's been progress with, putting UV light up your butt or whatever it was. Right? And Dr. Fauci is staying the course. He's continuing to be a scientist amongst this insanity, right? He's not like, screw you, I'm out of here. This guy's an idiot. I'm not sharing a stage with him. You're on your own. He hung in there, even when he got death threats, even when he became vilified on the right, as he has every day since, right? And you had podcasters like Joe Rogan and comedians and idiots who had no opinion, or no right to like bear their opinion on scientific matters chiming in. You had football players, right? Aaron Rodgers is telling people he doesn't believe in vaccines. Like, screw you, Aaron Rodgers. Who are you to say that? It's one thing to like, I'm not going to take this in my body. Well, good. Well, just stay the fuck home and don't go outside and lose your job as a quarterback. Because if you want to compete in the real world, if you wanted to be in the armed services, you'd be getting vaccines all day long, right? When you joined, you'd spend a You get so many shots and vaccines before you had to travel. Any of us who's toured with rock bands had to get vaccines. When I was a kid, you would get them in elementary school, you know? So the fact that they're able to inject this sort of anti-vaccine bro culture idiocy into our national discourse so easily, because you have all these avenues of delivery, the podcast, the right-wing media, Fox News, which was a huge purveyor of misinformation, which was rooting for Trump because they wanted an authoritarian to get back in office because Rupert Murdoch wanted to keep his tax cuts, right? And you had the rest of the media infrastructure going along with that as well. CNN, Jeff Zucker knew exactly who Trump was when I worked for Trump. Okay. Jeff Zucker was the head of NBC Entertainment at the time. He could care less in 2016. He knew Trump was a sexual assaulter. He knew Trump was addicted to drugs. He knew Trump would use the N word on set and defecate himself and could barely read. He knew that guy shouldn't be anywhere near the White House, and he kept his mouth shut to make money. Okay, and then he kept his mouth shut while Trump increased anti-Semitism and racism and homophobia for 4 years, right? And now they got another guy in charge at CNN that's trying to do the same thing, that's trying to turn it right wing. So that's why Musk is destroying Twitter. They're shutting down progressive speech and they're de-incentivizing it, right? You lose a follower count now. If you're a larger progressive account, you used to we all did, right? You want to see how many followers you're getting. The goal is to build your following, enlarge, the amount of people you're speaking to. It goes in the opposite direction now, right? Because Elon Musk has mandatory removals of people following left-wing accounts. People were getting kicked off of the Auschwitz Memorial account that were following it, and they would automatically get unfollowed, right? Big liberal accounts were getting automatic unfollows. This is all by design, because they want to shut down progressive speech and they want to make it a very unrewarding arena to walk into, and that's why Dave Chappelle would have Elon Musk on stage, because Dave is hoping everyone's going to cheer and it's going to make Dave look like the anti-hero free speech guy, as he's always claiming to be, and in reality, he spends half his time pandering to hate speech because it's cheap and easy, right? It makes you seem edgy to go after trans people. It makes you unimaginative. It makes you show that you don't really have that much depth, and I'm not as big a fan of his as everybody else is, because he talks about himself and how great he is all the time, and he's not that great. I grew up in the same part of the country when I was a young man. I'm from PG County. He was from Silver Spring. He's a little younger than me, but he paints himself as the funniest person to ever live and the funniest person to ever do comedy, which was the speech he gave at Duke Ellington when he went to get an award, when they were going to name a theater after him and they had to take it back because, so many people protested, as they should, because he offended them. He hurt a marginalized community. He punched down, But anyway, he claims he's the funniest guy from that era. There was 1,000 guys funnier. You go to a DC comedy club, you'll find funnier guys than Dave Chappelle any night of the week. But he has been anointed by the media and, he's on SNL and, he's not without talent. Don't get me wrong. He's very good at what he does. A lot of comedy is sort of a shtick. It's an act. You get good at writing and how you deliver it, and you get really good at refining your material. And he's a top level performer. There's no question. But what are you doing with that position? Are you illuminating and enlightening people? Are you lessening the burden and helping to protect vulnerable people? Or are you trying to make a buck off of white douche bros, which is essentially what he is trying to do, in my opinion? It reminds me of Michael Jordan, Republicans buy sneakers too, when they were trying to get Michael to chime in the race against Jesse Helms or whatever. And he sent Jesse Helms back to Congress because Jordan was like, I'm not getting involved. I want to get rich. It's not my job to uplift all the people. And I get that, and I especially get it in Michael Jordan's case. In Chappelle's case, who uses the N-word every other word and tries to present himself as sort of a beacon of truth and free speech. And then his material is sort of lazy, anti-Semitic tropes like he did on SNL a few weeks ago. Then no, this is not edgy. You're just dumb. You're just being a dumbass and you're not helping. And you're not even that funny, because who wants to listen to somebody talk, about how great they are the whole time? He puts his freaking name on his clothes. I've met the dude a lot. Anyway, enough of a rant. I'm not the fan. Everybody else is, obviously, And what bothers me about that is I know how many people worship Chappelle. If you work in the clubs, they're all trying to be like Chappelle all day long. They all sit in stools. They all slap the microphone on the side of their leg. Like all his little ticks are copied, and that's the larger point of what I'm trying to get to. Like you have a responsibility when you start to have a large platform or you're the head of a company like Twitter to understand you're going to have undue influence and whatever you say is going to have a reach beyond your needs, right? I understand why someone may need to tweet a certain way or say a certain thing, to deal with their own motivations and circumstances. But you have to understand the effect that's going to have on the greater world. In recovery, you have a thing called restraint and pen and tongue, restraint of pen and tongue, right? And it's one of the more positive aspects of the things you learn when you're getting sober because it has undue benefits in your life, and it's maybe one of the hardest things to apply, right? It's very hard not to curse that guy out who cuts you off in traffic or lean on your horn. It's very hard not to send that email immediately, when a colleague sends you something and blames you for something you already did or whatever, and you want to react in anger, right? Or in defensiveness or in all these other ways that, can get ourselves in trouble, our own sort of ego, not even character defects, and that's a primary part of it, but like, your own motivations and desires, like I was talking about, with plays. So it's a wonderful discipline that will make your life a lot easier, and it involves a lot of practice and it's not easy to do, but there's a reason for it, right? Because you're not trying to make things worse. And in someone in recovery, you're not trying to get yourself all riled up, right? They say, self-righteous anger is the dubious luxury of normal men, right? And you're admitting in the first step, you're not normal. You're powerless over alcohol. You pick up a drink and all bets are off and you're screwed, right? So you have to control the things you can within you. And all you can really control in life is how you react to something, right? Or what you say, or thinking before you speak. And a guy like Elon, who just thinks, it's free speech. I should be able to tweet whatever I want because it's fun. But it's not fun. It's not fun for the, Jewish people in New Jersey who couldn't celebrate Shabbat, 3 weeks ago because they were under threat because so many synagogues had attacks, and he's proselytizing for anti-Semites and putting Kanye West back on Twitter, right? It's not fun for them. It wasn't fun for people, in the LGBTQ community after Paul Pelosi was attacked when Elon Musk retweeted a homophobic lie conspiracy theory, that Paul was somehow involved with his attacker. That wasn't fun for the kids who are going to get attacked for being gay in middle school and high school, right? So it's not fun when you make a joke about, trans people that are suffering, and being attacked for trying to live their truth. I was in a diner on Thursday. I'm driving up to Massachusetts for the day, and I was in a diner in a beautiful little town in the sort of Hudson Valley, right just east of the Berkshires, right on the Connecticut border. And there was a young man in there, a young woman, trans woman, okay? See that already, I'm not saying that to be funny, who was somebody who was young and transitioning, but not fully there, right? So he had he had a wig on and he had some high-heeled shoes, and the rest of his outfit, he was a young black man, and I'm saying he was black because we were in a predominantly white area. We're just being black would probably make you not self-conscious, but, make you the target of being the other, because I happen to know the demographics of where we are. This is Trump signs. This is people with guns and pickup trucks. This is like, New York's version of the hillbilly area with pockets of wokeism, to borrow the term they hate, so, somewhat arts communities, but this isn't Woodstock. Okay. We're not this isn't, and it's certainly not the East Village. So this kid's already probably marginalized in this community, and then he's coming out as who he is. And I remember walking out of the diner, and I briefly made eye contact with him, but I didn't want him to think, I was staring at him or anything, because he probably gets a lot of that. So, I just sort of glanced at him, and person I was with like said something not bad, but just looked at him like, did you see that person? And I said, can you imagine the courage it takes to be that young woman, to live your truth in this community? To do it anywhere takes courage. It takes courage to do it in San Francisco and New York, and I've seen friends of mine do it, and it's the bravest thing you'll ever witness. And jump at the opportunity to support somebody in living their truth, because it'll pay dividends in your own life and your own understanding. But to see it in this situation, to know that kid was going in there and he sat at the counter and ate lunch, by himself. And it just, it struck me as like, that's what you want the world to be. You want people to do what they have to do for themselves, to live out their own truth, not hurting anybody, not harming anybody, just being like, this is the vibe I need to chase for who I am, you know? And you need to applaud people in that search. You want a society where people feel comfortable being their truest expression of themselves, right? Because that makes us all richer. That makes our world more vibrant. It's like going into the garden and telling the flowers not to bloom, right? And then you got a spring without yellow and tulips and and blue and green and red and all these wonderful colors of the rainbow that you're meant to experience while you're here. You're getting denied by people oppressing, people living their truth. And then you add on to that the threat of violence, so people begin to hide. And they don't want to live their truth, and you don't get to see what their gift was fully. You don't get to see that flower bloom, so to speak, So anything in opposition to that is something to be examined. It's not something to be feared, because we're going to win, right? Love always wins, as I say, but it is something to be aware of, and it's got to be part of the battle plan, right? It's got to be part of the reason that we, continue to speak out against this stuff and call out somebody like Elon Musk, or Dave Chappelle, who's platforming this stuff, 10 minutes. It was 10 minutes of booing. He gave him 10 minutes of prime stage time. You could have given that 10 minutes up at the top of the show and had an extra opener, given some local comedian from a marginalized community a chance to tell their truth to your vast audience and change some lives and open some hearts. Instead, you get the richest man in the world to come on stage and get heckled for 10 minutes, and he has to ask you what to even say because he's not a comedian. And by the way, that same guy, Elon Musk, got to host SNL, right? My friend Kathy Griffin has never hosted SNL, but Elon Musk has. And by the way, we shot the first Celebrity Apprentice on the stage, the first finale, the first boardroom where he's like, you're fired. Piers Morgan was on that season. And Omarosa, we shot that at Studio 8H on the set of SNL, essentially. They weren't there that day, but so it's all a construct. It's all theatrics. It's all bullshit. Like, Trump wasn't a businessman. He wasn't a genius. He was a licensing, company, essentially, at that point, where they'd license the Trump name and they'd slap it on the side of some crappy building, and he'd claim to be a builder. He wasn't, right? He was just a brand, and other people built it and put his name on the brand. And now that brand is in serious jeopardy, because that brand was found guilty on 17 counts of tax evasion, essentially, last week, right? And Alan Weisselberg sort of fell on the sword for him, and they tried to blame everything on Alan, who was Trump's right-hand man in terms of the finance, okay? And there was nothing that Alan was doing that Trump wouldn't have known about. That's the other thing about Trump. He's a micromanager. Okay, he decides what color skirts the women wear in his office. Okay, the way people looked in the White House was all down to Trump. That's why they'd get all these old Miss girls. They liked young, hot, blonde girls. So Ivanka's assistant was from Old Miss. Her father was appointed to be a prosecutor down in Mississippi, while his daughter was the assistant to Ivanka Trump. And so a little payback. And then she would bring up like Old Miss, like interns and stuff in the White House, because Trump wants hot girls around for the guys to feel empowered. And that's why he would hire all these abusive guys who got fired, like the one who was dating Hope Hicks and stuff, Rob something, I can't even remember his name. They're all the same type of guy, right? Douchey, misogynistic bros, right? Because that's the bullying culture. That's the sort of like, their idea of what an alpha male white guy is. Right. And it's all It's all an act. Inside, they're insecure, they're emotionally stunted, little boys, right? But they're trying to act like they're real men on the world stage. And that's what you see in something like Elon, right? He looks like a fool to anybody who understands anything about psychology. You're like, this guy's a narcissist. This guy has no hope at ever being happiness or, happy or feeling true love, because you can see the compulsion of understanding on a deep level that nobody really likes you. Trump has the same thing. I've never seen a scared, weaker, more scared and weaker psyche than Trump's up close. If you remember, there's a clip of him getting booed. Same thing, right? Booing is like the worst nightmare for a narcissist, because all eyes are on you, and you're being mocked. And your whole life is about trying to prop up this idea of how great you are, right? But you're hoping that the dividends pay off in real life. When you walk into a room, you want everybody to turn and look at you and go, oh, look, there's Donald Trump. He dates supermodels and, makes a lot of money. There's Elon Musk. He builds rockets and is super cool, and Dogecoin bros love him. Like they want that adulation. They both want the same thing. Trump, I would tell people, he wants to get high, he wants to hit on women, and he wants music to play when he walks in the room, right? He's dominated and obsessed with how he's going to feel in the moment. Real pragmatic people, they're gaming stuff out years down the line. Impulse-oriented people are sort of not having that restraint of pen and tongue, like I talked about, and they do stupid things like buy Twitter, because they send out a tweet and say, should I buy Twitter? And all their little minions say, yeah, do it, Doge father. And then he does it, right? Then he shoots off his mouth, gets involved in something that his ego thinks, I'm the richest guy in the world, $40 billion is nothing to me, or $44 billion, makes an offer, they don't let him get out of it, and he ends up owning the thing, but it has real world consequences, because now he's hurting people. He's affected the livelihoods of people who shared information on Twitter, right? If you're a journalist, if you're doing a Substack like I'm doing, the reach is now severely limited. In the month that he's owned the company, I would get a bunch of subscriptions on a Sunday a month ago. I'd get 12 or something, or 8. I got 2 yesterday, for something that I put just the same amount of work into, That's fine. I'm just using myself as an example, So imagine like people that their whole living is based off of like distributing their information on there. He screwed that whole, group of people, entertainers that want to, musicians. Hey, I'm going out on tour. Here's my tour dates. Check it out. Read the tweet. See if I'm coming to a town near you. These aren't rich people that are doing that. That's people out there working their butts off on the road, comics, musicians, writers. That was the benefit of social media, was that like you didn't need a big corporation to sign you to a record deal to have to have an audience and a career anymore, right? You could put your stuff out, on iTunes, and you could tweet, I'm going on the road. Here's my single. If you like it, come and check it out. And you'd build a fan base, and you would create your own sort of following and your own career without the burdens of sort of tastemakers at corporations, and without all the BS. It's supposed to be a liberating thing. Somebody like Elon Musk should want to champion something like that, right? Instead, he comes in and tries to kill it, because there's too much progressivism in it. That's why they don't like the humanities, right? They don't like woke stuff, and music tends to be woke, right? So it worked on that level. He's dismantling that. He's dismantling the sort of free speech, right? All the best COVID information I got was reading, actual doctors and nurses and the threads of them documenting what was happening and what's still happening, right? That's Twitter. Like I can absorb a vast amount of information from a lot of different sources pretty quickly, right? Instead of, waiting for the New York Times to put out the article or whatever. You could basically, I could see what the top papers and what the top pundits were saying, pretty quickly. And that is not, in line with sort of kleptocracy and authoritarianism, because they don't want the ability to sort of organize thought and react as one to bad things that are happening, right? They want to control the narrative. They want to be able to say, hey, this is what's happening. We're going to open the country back up. Masks sucks. Masks suck. Dr. Fauci's an idiot. Go about your lives. And that's basically what they did. They did that to enough of the country that a lot of us just sort of gave up, on ever stopping the pandemic. Right now, it's just assumed you're going to get it a couple times a year. Nobody really wears masks anymore, and it's spreading again, right? But the disinformation and that ecosphere of toxic, masculine, anti-woke BS feeds into all that kind of stuff, right? And then you have a population that just spends their time like fighting amongst themselves or reacting to the more extreme elements, right? A couple of weeks ago, we had LGBT Proud Boy protest, anti-trans protest. They showed up with guns in Cleveland because there was a story hour, a drag story hour, which is about as harmless as you could get, right? But they show up with their M16s in their uniforms and their masks, and they intimidate, they spread hate. At the same time, down in Florida, a bunch of literal neo-Nazis showed up with swastika flags outside another trans event, somewhere outside of Orlando. Same thing. And the cops were called. The cops showed up and just sat in their cars. They didn't do anything to disperse the Nazis because that would have gone against, the political base of their governor, right? Ron DeSantis, who's actively courting the Nazi vote. Okay. Every time he gives a public speech, of a large scale, like a CPAC or something, Nazis show up outside and he's refused to denounce them. And that's been going on for over a year, right? So imagine not being able to speak out. Think of the GOP. They're scared to denounce Trump's dinner with Kanye and Nick Fuentes because they don't want to piss off the part of the MAGA base that's a white supremacist Nazi organization. And they're interchangeable. It's all racism right now. If you're a member of the GOP, you're actively involved in a party that is white supremacist and racist and anti-Semitic, okay? And it's not going to end well for the GOP. All of these men are going to become a stain on the history of democracy. You're not on the good side right now. You're on the side of the Nazis and the despots and the worst of us, the dregs of our society. But that's what they're courting. And they're building an army, right? North Carolina, they attacked the substations in Moore County. People didn't have power for days in rural North Carolina in the winter. The first Saturday of December, Saturday night, they're all plunged into darkness because there was a coordinated attack on the power stations with guns, with the big machine guns that these guys think it's their birthright to walk around in. Again, why do you want the right allowing everybody, why do you think the right rather wants everybody to be well armed? They want their followers to intimidate the rest of us. They want to sow fear. And something like attacking the power stations, that's guerrilla warfare. America's a vast country. It's bigger. There's more unpopulated land than there are populated places in America still. That's the gift and the majesty of America, just how much land is out there. That being said, places like Oklahoma, there's all these Aryan gangs, right, outside the main city in Oklahoma. What is it called? Somebody can put it in the chat. I only go to Okemo, where they have the Tulsa, right outside of Tulsa, in the the scrub land. It's all scrub land in Oklahoma. Sorry, but it's not the prettiest state. Okay, let's just put it that way. I've been there a lot on tour, but my point is they have these compounds with Aryan Nation prisoners and stuff. The Washington Post did great reporting on it. And they're sort of living their own lawless lives out there. And, you watch Breaking Bad or something, you saw these gangs that can sort of live on these compounds in rural America. So think of a place like, rural North Carolina in Moore County where they attack these substations. Those guys are off up into the hills 5 minutes after they do it, and you're not going to find them. So think of those kind of acts coordinated happening all around the country. And what a nightmare that would be for law enforcement, and then factor in how many members of law enforcement are also involved in this. And a big article just came out Monday of how many Homeland Security guys were part of the Oath Keepers. Okay. Anybody who's been around these guys know it's a very similar mindset. And that's not to say there aren't a lot of decent law enforcement officers out there. There are, but there's also a lot of guys who sort of come out of the military and have that same kind of like toxic, I'm a white guy supremacist stuff, to the point that when the FBI was investigating this stuff starting in 2015, and collecting information and going to make some arrests on all these white supremacists, like sort of terrorist leaders in this country, they didn't send the names to local police departments because they knew so many local cops were friends with these guys. They didn't want to tip them off. That says everything about it. When the federal government doesn't trust the local PDs, and then the federal government, Homeland Security and stuff, is infiltrated with Oath Keepers. So think of that nightmare scenario, if you will. Think of like a bunch of coordinated but isolated guerrilla attacks on electrical substations and things like that, plunging things into darkness. Then the Walmart's dark and you break in and steal all the guns, which happened in Moore County, North Carolina, right? Hours after the attack, a gun store was knocked over. There was talk, the guns were taken out of a Walmart and stuff. So you're getting weapons, you're disrupting civilian life, you're endangering lives because people need electricity, if you're on dialysis or something, a breathing machine, whatever, it just not to freeze to death, you know what I mean? You need electricity. So think of that, that knocks out the cell towers. Think of that happening all over the country and not being able to trust the law enforcement. As the case was, again, in North Carolina, where the sheriff had been pictured with the woman who was part of like a January 6th organizing group, a MAGA chick lady. I don't mean to be disrespectful, right? This MAGA lady who put on Facebook that she understood why the power went out and she was all for it. I'm paraphrasing, but she was basically, she's since deleted the post, but she was like, basically, I know why this happened and it's a good thing. Jesus loves you. This fundamentalist, these Christians, these white nationalists could do a lot of damage. They could wreak a lot of havoc. And the danger in that is that the guys that are spurring them on know it. Somebody like Trump would flee the country before he would stand and be counted, right? Trump is not going to roll in there to court and defend himself if he gets indicted by the Justice Department. There's going to be some logistical hassles to trying to flee. I said recently he would flee and people are like, his plane can't refuel. He can hop on a boat. Okay. He's in Fort Lauderdale. There's an ocean front, right? There's a marina part of Mar-a-Lago. Okay. He can hop right on a boat, get taken out to international waters and whatever. That guy could be in the wind quicker than you think. And if you think all the Secret Service will throw him down and arrest him, they didn't do that any other time, right? And guys like Tony Ornato lied to Congress, stonewalled. Bobby Engel, who I went to high school with, was the guy who got choked in the back of the SUV. These guys weren't unsympathetic, They didn't tell Congress the truth about what Trump said and did, and they might have justified it that they were, protecting the president, but these are kind of Marine, white guy, ex-cop. Tony Ornato had a position in the White House, a political position, and left the Secret Service to do that and then was put back in the Secret Service. No, these are guys that drank the Kool-Aid, and there's a lot of people that drank the Kool-Aid in this country, right? Look at the election in Georgia this past week. Look how many people voted for Herschel Walker. I worked with Herschel Walker. He was on Celebrity Apprentice, okay? He wasn't even the worst guy behind the scenes. He wasn't actually that unfriendly or bad a guy. He didn't talk about vampires and stuff back then, but he was in no way ever qualified to be in the United States Senate. Anybody who spent more than 5 minutes with the guy would come away with a profound understanding of that. I promise you. Okay. But he was cynically put up there by the GOP because he was black. Right. And they didn't want Senator Raphael Warnock to go back. So they said, hey, we're not being racist if we put up another black guy, even if he's a caricature, of what rural racist white Georgians think a black guy is. Right? Even if he's like the worst stereotype we can think of, because we really want to deny black excellence and how much a gift that is to this country and a threat to our ignorant way of life. So why don't we just put this candidate up there? And anybody with a brain or a conscience, even a conservative back in the day, would have been like, no way. That guy's not qualified. I'm going to cross party lines and vote for the guy who already did the job who's qualified. Or I'm not even going to vote, but I'm not voting for that guy. But people showed up and voted for him anyway. They voted party line. They voted for their jersey, as is said. And that's the legacy of Trumpism, dividing us, making it you against me. That's a dangerous precedent, and that's what allows the sort of, soft guerrilla warfare and stochastic terrorism that we're now facing. Trump will egg it on. If he can get out of this country and tell people to fight from afar, he will. Okay? He'd very easily say, hey, they're going after me. It's a witch hunt. I fought for freedom. They stole the election and now they want to lock me up. I'm going to go overseas for a minute, but I'll be back when you win the war on my behalf. In the meantime, send me $20, that he'll do something like that, and people will believe it. They'll believe they're freedom fighters, and they'll raise their sons to be freedom fighters. And they'll sit up there in their pickup trucks and their cabins and their trailers or their suburban ranch houses or their Park Avenue apartments, and they'll fund that chaos. They'll fund that militarization. And big companies, guys like Rupert Murdoch, guys like Elon Musk, they'll think nothing of sowing the discord and the disinformation so they can get out of doing their fair share, right, of what's right in a civic life, paying their taxes, for example, being a billionaire, and getting all these benefits from making so much money in this country and not paying your fair share, let alone somebody like Elon who's anti-union. I wouldn't buy a Tesla because they catch on fire and they're ugly. They're crappy interiors. They're not well built. A lot of quality control issues. I always think it's not about how fancy something is. It's about how well it's made, right? Same in a hotel. Fancy hotel over a well-managed hotel, night and day. Same thing with a restaurant, right? You always go for the well-built, well-managed, quality control stuff, right? I played that Martin at the top of the show. A Martin is coming out of that factory in pristine shape and it's going to be built to last, right? So it's the same thing. It's the same thing in business. It's the same thing in life. So a Tesla, it's crappily built. It's not built by proud union workers, right? It's built by guys who aren't allowed to organize and get intimidated and get picked on if they're black, as Elon had to settle a case of racial harassment of an employee, who happened to be black. That's disgusting. That's not a shop where I'm buying your product from. That's not somebody I'm going to back up with my money. And, electric vehicles are great. Everybody should get one and soon they will. But all these other companies are coming out with a far superior product. So there's no reason to buy a Tesla, and you got to boycott. You got to push back on these guys because they're getting people hurt. People are going to get killed over Elon Musk's tweets, and that should not ever be the case. There is free speech in this world, but, like the cliche case says, you can't, yell fire in a crowded theater and cause a stampede. And essentially that's what these guys are doing, right? They want to cause the stampede. They want to hijack the narrative at a time when you have real issues that we should be paying attention to. Climate change being at the top of that list, food insecurity and poverty and childhood poverty, all these things we have to address. Healthcare, being a human right. People shouldn't be rationing insulin in this country as they are. People are going to choose between getting presents for their kids and, or getting their prescription filled. Too many people. And Biden's actually doing something about a lot of this stuff, a lot of stuff, but they're not the guys. They're not the types to brag about it and shout it from the rooftops. That's why I went down there, to help try and get that message out. And the story. I was invited down there with these other progressive influencers, because they were like, hey, we're doing a lot of stuff. Our heads are down and we're getting it done. We're not great at all this other stuff. Help us get the word out, And I was more than happy to do that. And people need to hear that word. But it's hard to hear about, 10.5 million jobs created in 2 years, which is more than any other president at this point in their presidency. You're not going to hear about that as much when it's like, oh my God, can you believe what Elon just said? right? And it's not to say to ignore what Elon said, because it's important to call the stuff out. But it's to understand whoever lies the loudest controls the narrative, and whoever creates the most chaos controls the narrative, right? That's why Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking about buying butt plugs at a CVS, at a young Republican committee meeting on Park Avenue in New York City on Saturday night, which speaks to my point of these guys are everywhere. The guys that were controlling Trump were from 740 Park Avenue, the Billionaires building, where first David Koch lived and his wife, and, Charles Koch, who's still with us, where these guys sort of fomented and funded the Federalist Society and the Heritage Foundation and the modern sort of libertarian Tea Party movement. All this stuff was backed by billionaires who basically wanted to be masters of the universe, didn't want to pay their fair share, and found a magic formula in treating sort of mediocre rural white Americans that had been sort of ginned up on Mountain Dew and NASCAR and Fox News and racial resentment and cultural ignorance and xenophobia, and a bullshit toxic idea of what it means to be a patriot because they watched a Reagan commercial in their pajamas and their dad thought he was a good American, right? So these guys are ripe for the picking. And these billionaires come through with their bullshit well designed and gerrymander and redistrict and flood zones with, candidates that are beholden to them and have no real moral, compass themselves. They're just venal little schmucks, Josh Hawleys and Ron DeSantis's and Tom Cotton's, Jim Jordan's. The list goes on. Ted Cruz. Those are all Tea Party guys, essentially, And then Trump came along and they turned, they put like Everclear in the Tea Party punch, right? It just became on steroids. It became such a circus sideshow, freak show that it became a winning formula for all these other guys to get in. Your Marjorie Taylor Greenes and your Matt Getzes, this new generation. And now they're trying to get Kyle Rittenhouse to run for Congress, a kid who's only famous for murdering 2 people. And he got away with it because the MAGA judge was like, yep, those are guys that deserve to get murdered. You're a good man, son. Go on your way now. And the Republicans made a hero out of him, right? Because that's the future, because it's idiocy, right? It's branding violence and toxic masculinity and a doughy little white kid as what the idea is of a true patriot in this country, right? They're a minority and a shrinking minority, but they're able to hold on to that power base because they're well-funded, right? Because billionaires happen to coalesce with their train of thought. Not that the billionaires necessarily buy the bullshit, but they don't want those people turning and figuring out who's really screwing them over. And that's America. That's been America since the Industrial Revolution, since before it, since the plantation owner days and the founding fathers. They wanted indentured servants, from Ireland and England to resent the African Americans, right? They didn't want them saying, hey, why is that guy in the big house? He doesn't, I never see him going to work, and I see a 12-year-old going down in the mine, and dying by the time he's 19. Like, what's going on here? This doesn't seem right, They don't want unions. They don't want things busting sweatshops. Look at the labor history of the United States. If you ever want to, jump into a facet of this nation and who we really are that hasn't been witnessed a lot, look at unions. Look at workers and how people were abused forever, until labor unions, until the Democratic Party. To be fair, the war on wokeism didn't just begin. It's been going on for a long time. It's always been wokeism. It's any sort of progressivism that deals with human rights, that deals with not exploitative things. It doesn't mean people are always going to be richer and poorer. That's not what I'm talking about. But people should have a decent shot, at being a functioning, healthy human being, right? You shouldn't. If you have a job, you should have a place to sleep and something to eat and health care. That should be, everybody should have that, whether you have a job or not, because some people are unemployable for a host of reasons that need to be treated before you punish that person for not having a job. Okay? But we don't have any of that social safety net. Well, we do have it. That's not fair to say. It's under attack, right? Social Security, Medicaid, those were all the things they wanted to go after, if they were able to take back the Senate. And look how they tried to, do that with this cynical choice, with a Herschel Walker. And he got beat, thank God. And we get to go into a season of light and holidays reflecting on our better angels, right? And that's what I want us to do. Like, this chaos is exhausting, right? But you can't give up, right? You can't let the idiots like Elon Musk win. Trump's toast. Trump hasn't left Mar-a-Lago. He knows he's screwed. Okay, that's the good news. If I give you a holiday gift, apparently Preet Bharara said today that like he thinks indictments are coming soon against Trump. Preet Bharara is a lot smarter guy than me. He's got a lot more of an inside track. If he says it, I believe it, and I do believe it. I do believe accountability is coming to that guy. We don't know how it's all going to play out. As I said earlier, he could flee, he can do all kinds of things, but he is running out of time. A guy who's a king of running out the clock and using, his sort of position of power and his wealth to hire lawyers to stall on his behalf. That jig is up. I think he's met his match in Jack Smith and Merrick Garland. As quiet as they've been, I do feel like the hammer is going to come down, and it's going to come down someday soon. Okay, but the rest of the battle isn't won, right? What Trump started and created is 1,000 little wildfires in this country. When he goes away, it doesn't end. That's why we need to, that's why we need to stay in the fight, essentially, is what I'm saying. We need to keep sharing progressive speech and thought. You can get off of Twitter, I understand that, but get on Post, get on something else where you can stay connected. Substack. You're welcome to follow me. It's free to sign up. If you guys don't know how it works, you just put in your email and you get an emailed newsletter a couple times a week that I put in a lot of work on, and you can also subscribe, and that supports the podcast. And I love that so many people have done that. It really means more than you know. But that's how that works. And you can keep in touch with the kind of things that I'm trying to say and watch it on YouTube and the podcast and all the things everybody's doing and sharing. Continue to do is my point, right? Because you can't let these bad guys win. Twitter can go down in flames, but you don't want to hand the win to somebody like Elon Musk, who karma's going to catch up with. Okay, people aren't going to keep buying Teslas, right? He's going to run afoul of the government. He keeps attacking, guys who just got the Congressional Medal of Honor, right? And half his business is getting government contracts for SpaceX and stuff. So, again, no, restraint of pen and tongue. Just let me speak before I think. That's not what you want in a corporate leader. That's not what you want in the CEO of a company. Twitter's not public, but Tesla is. You imagine being an investor in Tesla? It was almost $400 in April before he started doing all this Twitter stuff, right? It's 178 or something right now. I haven't checked it in a couple weeks, but it's lost half its value, in 6 months because the guy doesn't understand restraint of pen and tongue. It's mind blowing. And his interest will still be served if he destroys it, which is ultimately his game plan, right? He just wants to take it out. It's worth $44 billion to the people he represents, like the Saudis. It's like, that invested in him. He doesn't represent the Saudis, but that's where he got the money, right? Think of like the World Cup, right? Everybody's watching the World Cup. I watched the England match the other day. They always lose in the quarterfinals, in penalties, as they did again. But think of, if you've watched the brilliant John Oliver, he did a deep dive on FIFA and them awarding the World Cup to Qatar. And what they did was they had to basically build all these stadiums in 10 years. So they went to India and, Bangladesh and Southeast Asia and brought all these guys over to build these things and then basically held them hostage and abused them, and made them live in inhumane conditions, and you could have just brought those guys over there, paid them, made sure they had a decent place to sleep and eat and sanitary conditions. They would have made their money and sent it back home and all would have been fine, but they still exploited them and lied about it and punished them, and that's something that's always been with humanity. It's enslaving other people essentially. And we have economic, situations that present themselves where human beings get caught up in this mass global commerce and get ground up with no basic protections or a minimum standard, right? There's nobody says you shouldn't have, some people are going to have to leave their homes and go make more money and send it back home. There's a noble gallantry and bravery in doing that. Those people shouldn't be punished for that. They shouldn't be unpaid for their work. And that's what happened. And now the cup's going on and everyone's cheering and you're standing in stadiums that were built on blood that the guys who built them didn't get, you know, paid for and were exploited. And the journalists that pointed that out are showing up dead, right? The journalist died over the weekend, and, two of them now. A photojournalist just died last night in the famous case of David, I can't think of his last name, forgive me, but he wore the World Cup t-shirt with the rainbow flag, to represent LGBTQ communities and his own brother who was gay. And then he shows up, drops dead, at a match mysteriously. Right? Because he questioned the government, So I'm not saying they killed him. I'm just saying they probably killed him, right? Because he stuck his nose in where it didn't belong. But why it did belong there is my point. But why do people still want to, exploit to that extent? They have so much money. They could have just paid these guys fairly. There's something like sadistic beyond it. It's not enough to just achieve something. You have to break the will of the people too, and then be unempathetic about it, right? Just be like, whatever. Just like they got fired getting a big laugh line last night, just like, Elon saying, branch COVIDians, thinking it's a joke. Over 1 million people died. A lot of people are going to sit down to Christmas and wish mom or dad was still there like they were at Christmas 2020. Right? But they're not anymore because we had an idiot who was in charge of the country and he only cared about his own political interests. That's why I pointed out Trump's drug addiction. It wasn't that he could, if you could do the job and do the substance, more power to you. It was that I knew he had the isms so bad that if there was a crisis that arose, he would only think about his own self-interests, right? And he wouldn't have restraint of pen and tongue. He would say, oh, masks are stupid. Or just drink bleach, or whatever. We're going to open everything back up by Easter, because somebody told me that'll help with the poll numbers, with the white nationalists that I need to get reelected. And the anti-vaxxers and the idiots who listen to Joe Rogan, right? So he did it. He had no restraint of pen and tongue, and people paid with their lives. Words matter, right? Free speech isn't free. You have a responsibility, to use your words. It's like the Four Agreements. Did you guys ever read the Four Agreements, Ruiz? It's like Toltec wisdom. One of them is be impeccable with your word, right? Always tell the truth. Words matter. You create your own destiny with your words. Words are like a prayer going out into space. That's why it doesn't feel good when you just say dumb stuff or you gossip, right? It might feel good in the moment, but it's like eating sugar or something. You get a bit of a rush when you speak out in anger and then you feel stupid afterwards. You're like, damn, I shouldn't have done that, right? We all do it. That's why it doesn't feel good. It's not good for your spirit, because there's such powerful things. You can lift somebody up, It's like music, right? Music can lift us up. Can say things that words can't, You can't lie, with music so easily. You can fake it, but it's hard to lie. People connect to the truth, right? And your words can always be true. You can strive towards that, and being true to yourself is okay. But you have to be true to yourself in a society that you understand you're a part of the bigger whole, and your words are going to ripple. It's like the butterfly flaps its wings in China, and, it's a tsunami by the time it hits Cape Cod. I mangled that analogy, but you get the point, right? Things live on beyond us. It's all energy that we're putting out in the universe, you know? And you have to be careful about that. And we're in a time where you have to look at a lot of people putting a lot of bad things out there for their own gain, you know, and they're making others suffer because of it. And it's not a good thing, you know. That's why we need to come together. We need to laugh. We need to rejoice. We need to celebrate. We need to sing. And it's the season for doing all of that. I wish you guys the best. I hope you get a chance to do all that. The thing I always liked best about like the holidays, like the traditions, I always thought caroling was cool. Like it would be completely creepy now probably, but that idea, you know, of going door to door and spreading some merriment with your soul, you know, singing to your neighbors, that must have been something pretty cool back in the day, you know, when that was kind of more commonplace. You know, there must have been an exchange of spirit on a cold winter's night when that happened, you know, a wonderment in a child's eyes, seeing people sing, seeing you looking up and seeing your parents stand there in the door singing along, you know. And I don't mean that with any religious connotations. I just mean the spirit, the energy of togetherness. That's what we're trying to celebrate, you know. Right? There's no room at the inn, you know. The whole story, the whole nativity thing that we celebrate, you know, and that many people celebrate in the Christian side of things. Like, it's all about sort of like inclusiveness, taking care of the least among us, you know, providing shelter from the storm, you know, sharing, right? Wisdom, you know, all those things are free. All those things are available to all of us right now. We have to go within, you know, we have to get silent. We have to learn not how to tune out the craziness and the chaos, but how to react to it from a place of presence, not from restraint of pen and tongue, right? Not think before I act, not reaction, you know, but present, you know, conscious thought that aims towards love and points to the truth, okay? And that's what you guys helped me do. This has been another episode. Thank you to Michelle and April. They ordered t-shirts. I sent them out. I hope you have them by now. Anybody else wants one, you can get them at noelcasler.com. You can follow me at Noel's Notes on Substack, or find me on Twitter, or watch this on YouTube. I'll be back before Christmas, so I'm not going anywhere. I always love you guys. I always love that you listen. Until next time, peace.